Hello and welcome. Welcome to today's joint UNESCO-UNICEF-World Bank webinar. For those of you who are joining for the very first time, this is the 10th in a series of joint webinars that have been building on the framework for the reopening of schools that was developed by the three organizations together with the World Food Programme. Today's webinar is devoted to hybrid learning approaches. Just before saying a word and introducing the session, just to remind everyone that we do have interpretation, and you can switch to the preferred language by using the button on your right-hand screen, on the lower right-hand part of your screen. Also, just to remind everyone that to mute your mics when you're not speaking so that we avoid echoes. So as we said, today's webinar, we also know that the provision of remote and distance learning varied and ranged from high tech to low tech to no tech modalities. It's varying from the use of digital platforms, TV, radio broadcast, or take-home packages, or some combination. We also know that the choice and the combination of these technologies varied greatly across and within countries based on income level and other factors of potential disadvantage. And while some countries were better prepared for this sudden, massive transformation and transfer of the educational process entirely remotely, others were less so. You will have noticed in the concept note reference to one of the results that came from the joint UNESCO-UNICEF-World Bank survey on national responses is that in low-income countries, only 20% of those countries felt that whatever distance learning modality was being provisioned was the equivalent of in-person physical schooling. In middle-income countries, though, that ranged from 70 to 80%, and in high-income countries, 85% of the respondents considered that distance remote learning was the equivalent in effectiveness to in-person schooling and education. So that's really, at least for the middle and high-income countries, really a radical transformation of how we had, considered schooling as defined essentially by the physical space. But we know also that in all cases, and regardless of the combination of technologies and modalities used, that reach was insufficient, and that at least 1/3 of the world's learners had access to no distance remote learning at all, regardless of the type of provision. And for those who did, the effectiveness of the learning is the data and evidence on that we know is just coming out, and we know that also varied greatly within national context. Now schools began to reopen with 3/4 of school years of countries beginning their school years in September, reopening fully or partially, or reopening and reclosing, as we have seen, and we'll hear a little later from, for example, the case of Austria. There's been recourse to hybrid learning and hybrid modalities. And just a word here before we introduce the session. there is perhaps sometimes some uh, confusion or blurring between what we mean by hybrid learning and what we mean by blended learning. There might be different interpretations to this, but we could say that blended learning is not something new. Blended learning has been around for some time, and it is about essentially blending some technology facilitated learning with face-to-face learning within the classrooms, schools, and the physical setting of educational institutions. Hybrid learning, on the other hand, is generally understood as partially in person and face-to-face in the physical locations of schools, and partially that education is also partially delivered remotely through some form of technology. So useful to just keep that in mind as we listen to the various experiences. We will have in the program, as you have seen, presentations by colleagues within UNESCO, the World Bank, colleagues from academia as well as two country experiences, the experiences of Austria and of Colombia. Following those presentations, we'll hope to have some 20 minutes, if not a little more, for questions and answers, please, and discussion. Please don't hesitate to use the chat to react, to offer insights, to pose questions, and then we will close. We have 90 minutes for our session. So without further delay, I'd like to hand it over to our moderator, Val, who will introduce the speakers and the presentations we've got lined up for you. Over to you, Val.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you very much. It's great to be here, actually, in this webinar that is dedicated to a topic that we have been working for so many months already, you know, in hybrid learning. Also, good to be here and sharing the table with colleagues from UNICEF and the World Bank, with whom we have been working intensively also in the last month, especially in the GP Consortium program that we are together bringing some different innovation and the programs and research in different countries. So I think we have a perfect context to start this discussion. And as you explained, we have, let's say, two sets of speakers. The first ones, they are coming from the institutions that we know, UNICEF, the World Bank, and also from the academia. And then the second block we have with the experience coming from two countries, Austria and Colombia, representing our member states, and to share with us their reality, how they face this tremendous change that their education system faced during COVID times. So the same, without further ado, I'd like to kick off with Mr. Fenxiong Miao. He is the chief of the Unit for Technology and AI in Education in UNESCO. He has been leading UNESCO's work in ICT and education for many years. And we'd like to ask Fenxiong if he can share, for example, what are the key categories of blended or hybrid learning, and what are the potentials and limitations that we have when we face major distance learning models, because there are a couple of them, and what is the role of teachers? And if we can reimagine the futures of schooling, how they would look like, a closed one or an open model. So Fenxiong, the floor is yours, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Val. Thank you, Sobi. Pleasure to be the first speaker, because I have some commitments after a half hour, so I need to leave the webinar a little bit earlier. Sorry for that, and we will be happy to share some of our thinking and our actions in this area. So based on Sobi's introduction on the difference between hybrid learning and blended learning, I think is still a contestable question, whether blended learning will also cover the activities beyond the classroom. To me, it should cover also the learning activity beyond the campus and schools and the classroom, because it was used very first by the Open University of the UK to refer to the learning that they offer through some distance modality. Having said that, I want to share quickly 3 aspects. The first one, how we could analyze the blended learning and what kind of guidance we are providing to teachers. And the second one, to share our thinking of the future of schools, especially the technology-enabled open schools. And the third one is very quickly what we are doing to provide to support the content development. First, we have observed a lot of provisions of distance learning online courses. If we analyze a little bit, we will find that actually there are 3 modalities, especially after the outbreak of COVID-19. Suddenly, the government become one of the most important player in this area. Before, basically, it's from the commercial provider with some commercial products and online course. Very often, during the COVID-19, they offer some free introductory lessons, but only at a basic level. If the learners want to go deeper, they will find it's a fee charging lessons. We call it fee charging advanced lessons. And if the learners want to continue for 1 semester, want to get a credit, a degree, certificate, they will charge more. So it's an iceberg. You start from surface small, but you will go to find a large portion of spending and fee charge. And then the government coming to the field to develop the online courses. In the beginning, the idea is good to use online learning as a public good. It's also iceberg because in terms of the cost, in the beginning, it's very small. You offer some free course, but if you want to ensure the quality of learning, the government will find that it's a really huge iceberg, because if you want to ensure the quality of learning, you need to mobilize parents and teachers to offer a facilitation. And gradually we find that if the government want to ensure inclusive accessibility, it's a huge spending, and most of the government so far cannot afford. And at the same time, more and more the government are using government certified commercial courses, because the time is short and the capacity of the government agencies and public institutions are very limited. We need to mobilize the commercial company, but to certify their courses is happening in many countries to our knowledge. And based on this, we need to start from the education purpose, not only the learning outcome, to analyze the different stage of courses and the key elements and the key outcomes they can support. For example, usually the commercial courses will not cover the teacher, student, the social caring, and the fostering of the values. Is very important. It's the core of the education. We should not forget that. And at the same time, expansion of the access to education. Usually, it's not the purpose of the commercial courses. It has to be done by the government-led courses. And during the COVID-19, the core value is to ensure the continuity of learning, to reduce the loss of learning hour, and also to reduce the dropout rate. It's a huge challenge. It's a core purpose of online course or hybrid learning during the COVID-19. Afterward, it might be not so important. And then after the crisis, more and more we are talking about the using of hybrid learning, blended learning to extend or to enrich the learning opportunity. And then all of this should be aligned with the curriculum, and if possible, to align with the credits and the degrees. And and furthermore, we need to think of whether the course could support job-related micro-credentialing or certification. So that's the learning outcome. We cannot forget. That's the foundation element. And based on our observation and a lot of case study, we just released this book last week, actually on Friday, Ensuring Effective Distance Learning During COVID-19 Disruption, a guidance for teachers. You can download the full PDF from this URL. And under this book, I have introduced several times. We summarize the key categories of blended learning, including 4 major categories and 8 subcategories. It's not the purpose. The purpose is to really use this category to analyze what kind of teaching and learning activity different distance learning modality can really support, and to analyze what kind of media and the technology tools they are using, what are the format of the content they can support video, multimedia, only audio or only text, and what kind of devices we can use to access to this kind of content, the computer, smartphone, or only use paper or even radio. And then what are the accessibility for people with visual disability, hearing disability, and other disability, and what are the what kind of courses this different modality can support. We need to, and whether they can support the teachers editing and creation of material. We need to have this kind of in-depth analysis, and then whether this kind of modality can support teachers to manage the curriculum, especially the calendar, and whether they can support, what kind of teaching activity they can support. Is synchronous, live streaming, asynchronous video, but facilitated by synchronous coaching, or asynchronous reading and facilitated by asynchronous coaching. We need to analyze different scenarios where taking into consideration the real scenario, and also whether they cover and support student interaction and collaboration, whether it can support assessment, both formative and summative. And at the same time, we created this taxonomy to help teachers, institutions to analyze the platform. For example, in terms of curriculum courses, what kind of function they support from number 1 to very high quality, and whether they have the data management from without or to a very high level, and whether they can support learners' online collaboration, whether they can support online teaching and to what kind of level, and whether they can support formative assessment to what kind of level. And based on this, we analyze what are the gaps the teacher need to fill, and then to design the guidance for teachers' facilitation. Based on this, we provide the guidance for teachers, including how to design, how to monitor, how to conduct the formative assessment, and how to mobilize the resources, how to work with the parents. And then for each of the modality, we offer some curated resources that the teachers can download and can use. And for the second part, for the future of school, we have some thinking. We are thinking that based on the crisis, the government need to build inter-switchable school system, meaning that if the schools are forced to close during the crisis, the home-based classes and home-based learning should switch to that. And if the situation come to normal, and the students are going back to schools, and then we need to think of the technology-enabled school and use the online learning as a complementary element for the school education. So it's kind of an inter-switchable system. And based on this, we develop a guiding framework, the first draft, to think of the infrastructure, including technology infrastructure, teacher and human facilitator infrastructure, and also curriculum, or we can call it content infrastructure, to ensure that the school education is not only the course. The school education could be accessible both from school and from home, and even in the third place. And based on this, we go on to think of the 3-layer and the 9 enabling factors. And we provide a very detailed guidance, including what are the targets, what's the responsible agency, what are the objectives, and what's the lines of actions and the decision-making tree. And also we provide some example and supporting tools for the government to reference. And in general, we need to promote a society-wide collaborative open provision of school education in the future. And based on this, the last slide is what we are doing to support the content development. We still believe that the content is the most important element, and the country needed to rely on themselves to develop the content and the curriculum course. The Harare office led but supported by headquartered by our team, we developed this handbook for interactive radio. It's finished, it's being published. and we can share the PDF. I can ask the colleague of Harari to share with you the PDF. We are developing a training course on ICT Essential for Teachers based on UNESCO's framework. At the same time, we launched this Translate a Story initiative in eight countries, and we can see the progress. In Uzbekistan, they already translate more than 130 books from English into the local language. We have the progress in other countries. We are going to do it in more countries, and also going on to test the real use of the book. So, and just to share a piece of information, in October, we organized this online conference. We have many sessions, so we call it, it's a 3-day, it's an online conference called Beyond Disruption, Technology Enabled Learning Futures. And we had more than 90 speakers to share very comprehensive experience from government, from NGO, from institutions about distance learning. It's one of the most comprehensive resources regarding to distance learning. And then last week, we organized the International Forum on AI and the Future of Education. It's once again, we have more than 60 speakers. You can download the videos and presentations from this website. Last one, we have the ICT Education Prize. The deadline is not ended yet. You search prize for ICT education from UNESCO website, we will find the information. Thank you. I have to leave earlier, but you can take note of my email in case you have any questions. Thank you for your time. Well, over to you.
Thank you, Fenshun. That was very comprehensive, very interesting. I think is very useful, the guide that you just published, ensuring effective distance learning during COVID, especially dedicated to teachers. So we put here in the chat the address, so colleagues can download later. Also, I think very interesting, the different initiatives that UNESCO is leading, like the Translated Story with the GDL has been a very active campaign during this COVID time. And also an invitation for all colleagues to join and send your suggestions for the ICT in Education Prize that is also open, and we are looking to receive your innovation there as well. So thanks, Fenshun, and I would like to move to the next speaker that we have the pleasure to have with us today. That is Robert Hawkins. He's the EDTECH thematic lead in the World Bank and a colleague that has been working different projects with us. So Bob, welcome. And we know that you've been leading with other colleagues the World Bank principles for distance learning and hybrid learning. And you have those almost like magic 5 principles that have been very successful with different member states. So I'd like to invite you to share with us what is the key message of these principles, and also in terms of the studies that you are developing regarding the effectiveness of all these blended learning systems. So great to hear from you, and please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Val. Thanks, Toby. Thanks, Fenshun. Fantastic to be here with everybody. As Val said, we have just launched an EdTech strategy paper in response to the demand that we're getting from a number of our partners in ministries of education around how to think about integrating EdTech into education projects. The vision that we have for the strategy is to reimagine human connections to transform teaching and learning for all. And the focus is on human connections, that at the end of the day, the educational experience is a social experience, and that engagement between individuals is critical to the learning process. So we want to keep that front and center in all of our dialogues on how to think about the use of technology. So I'm not going to talk a lot about this slide. This kind of gives a little bit of the context and background that we're all familiar with regard to the many challenges that we were facing before COVID hit with regard to learning poverty and the extent to which the number of 10-year-olds in the world could not read a simple paragraph, and then compounded with COVID-19 and school closures, and the opportunities and challenges to rethink how education service can be delivered in the midst of massive school closures. And again, I emphasize that what we're talking about here is that education at its heart is about human connections and thinking about ways in which technology can create new connections, deepen connections and foster and extend existing connections. So as Val said, I'm going to share a little bit about 5 principles that we've developed as a result of many conversations with clients and colleagues and partners like UNESCO, UNICEF around the world. The first one is ask why. And this is the principle that EdTech policies and projects need to be developed with clear purpose, strategy, and vision of the desired educational change. So education needs to lead the investment on technology. All too often, we see technology leading the discussion where our colleagues and partners kind of think backwards on how to use that technology. Technology is simply a tool that can affect change. So the changes that we want to see in the classroom with teachers, with curriculum, with assessment systems need to kind of lead the discussion. The second principle is to design and act at scale for all. That EdTech initiatives should be flexible, user-centered, with emphasis on equity and inclusion in order to realize scale and sustainability. We find that when you work outside in, when you start with designing for the least connected, the most vulnerable, that you're creating solutions that de facto are able to scale with the more advantaged. And this includes in the case of hybrid and remote learning, what we've seen and what Peng Chung talked about is this multimodal strategy of looking at distribution of print, use of radio where it's available, use of television broadcasts where available, use of mobile, and use of online and LMS. And what we're finding in terms of the flexibility is that many countries are able to kind of design digital content that can be delivered over a number of modalities, as well as use mobile, for instance, for feedback to teachers, to parents, to students themselves. And I'll share a little bit some of the evaluations that we've started through a fund we have called the Strategic Impact Evaluation Fund. The third principle is empower teachers. Technology should enhance teacher engagement with students through improved access to content, data, networks, helping teachers better support student learning. One of the findings that I'll talk about in a second is that teachers have been overloaded with administrative work. How do we kind of use technology to free up teachers to focus more on the pedagogical aspects, on the teaching aspects? How can teachers be empowered to rethink their roles in remote and distance learning? What are the types of skills that they require? We're starting a project with a number of countries that are interested in empowering teachers to become innovators, to design and identify challenges in their classroom and to create solutions in groups. So again, the changing role of teachers and the way technology can empower teachers to do their job better and to do their job differently. The fourth principle is engaging the ecosystem. That education systems need to look beyond their own institutions, need to look at what other parts of the government are doing, most importantly, the Ministry of ICT and Telecom, and bring on a multi-stakeholder approach to engage different actors in society in the education process. One very good example, I'm not sure, I saw some colleagues from Turkey on the call, but Turkey is very much looking at ways in which to build out this ecosystem, to create an innovation hub in which universities, the private sector, NGOs, individual innovators can design EdTech solutions and integrate it into the ministry's education platforms, as well as introduce these innovations to teachers as part of their teacher professional development. The final one is be data-driven. That evidence-based decision-making within cultures of learning and experimentation enabled by EdTech leads to more impactful, responsible, and equitable uses of data. What we're finding is that data will become more and more important in the education process, not just for decision-making at the system level, but in terms of learning analytics and better understanding how students are learning and how they're progressing through the curriculum. Data needs to be used in an iterative manner by ministries of education such that they become learning organizations, that they're able to take data, understand data in real time and adapt programs as needed. This is a 3D approach that we're implementing these principles with partners. One is just discovery, kind of understanding what's happening around the world. The second is deploying solutions at both the pilot and then the scale level through our operations, but also through pilot activities, and then diffusing, sharing knowledge broadly on what works and what are some positive country examples from around the world. Now, this just shows how technology integrates through our broad education strategy, which looks at learners, teachers, classrooms, schools, and education systems. And again, we just kind of emphasize the 5 principles on using technology wisely to support all aspects of the system. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about an effectiveness study we did. Right when COVID hit, we reached out to 5 countries to understand how they were responding to the massive school closures. And this is just kind of a bit of a framework of the study. There were 3 phases. One was a compilation of policies. Second was a deep dive. And the third was kind of a multi-country synthesis. We looked at over 100 countries. We did deep dives in 5 countries. And then we synthesized a number of the lessons from these 5 countries. And this happened between May and July of last year. These were the 5 countries, Brazil, Kenya, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Peru. And this just gives you a sense of kind of their infrastructure and connectivity of how they were delivering remote learning during the crisis. As you can see, all of them had varying degrees of infrastructure, but you can see mobile is a common, very pervasive infrastructure that I would argue has been underutilized in education design and delivery. I've got 5 minutes left, right? Okay, Val's giving me the heads up. Thanks, Val. Keep me on track. So this gives you just kind of a sense of how they responded to remote learning. Brazil had a combination of modalities. Kenya relied on both radio, online, and television. Nigeria was mostly online, and this was an edu state, so this is partially due to a private-public sector partnership they had. Sierra Leone was all radio, and Peru used all of the modalities. So a few takeaways here. First of all, it's really important to leverage your institutional capacities. Countries were using what they had to deliver remote learning, leveraging prior investments, or collaborating with those that had it. This was particularly true in Latin America, where a bunch of online content was available and was being shared amongst countries. We're seeing this also now in these investments, that the countries that had invested earlier were much better placed. Countries that are investing now are really investing for resilience and trying to kind of future-proof their education systems if and when another pandemic hits or school closures. This idea of multi-channel strategies was really important, to be able to deliver education with what you had, with the modality you had, to try to reach the most vulnerable. And again, this was combining radio instruction with feedback through mobile phones, for instance, or feedback through a telephone to a teacher. And we found that this human connection was really important, that the feedback loop, to be able to access information on a website was fine, or to be able to push a nudge over text was fine. But when there was a human voice on the other end, it made a big difference in the effectiveness. Prioritizing teacher interaction with students, more pedagogical exchange, less administrative work. Teachers' jobs are incredibly, incredibly hard, and really hard during this pandemic. And what we found is that there were huge amounts of burnout, stress. They weren't prepared for teaching this modality. So there's a digital skills, digital pedagogy gap. But more than anything, there was a lot of administrative burden being asked on them to collect data on what students were doing. So looking at ways in which technology can relieve some of that burden going forward to help focus teachers. And then monitoring and evaluation, key to understanding effectiveness. We're in the process of doing phase 2, where we're looking at a number of countries. This is a framework on the right side of looking at the delivery systems, the coherence across the systems, the interactivity, which I mentioned is very important, curriculum adjustment, how curriculum is being adjusted and prioritized, teacher training and support, guides, looking at virtual coaching, looking at teacher networks, looking at innovative networks, as well as allocation of time and their new roles in the classroom. Monitoring and evaluation systems. looking at coverage and engagement, the effective combination of systems, assessment on remedial learning programs, which is really important as students come back to school with learning losses. How do we know in what areas they need to catch up? So identifying kind of where those gaps are and putting together strategies for catch up. And then the issues around equity and inclusion of ensuring that that we identify gaps, and those gaps can be closed with partners. These are just some kind of lessons on assessment, that assessment systems need to be strengthened, that many countries are kind of questioning national exams, looking at the trade-off between formative and summative assessments, that there's a very big difference between how systems are organized, whether they're centralized or decentralized, and the way that they've been kind of reacting to both the pandemic and the process for reopening of schools. Let me finally go to this almost last slide on the Strategic Impact Evaluation Fund. A lot of the projects that we're funding in this round, and we'll have data coming out in the coming months, are around use of mobile phones for this interactive, for this engagement, nudging parents to read to their children, complementing radio instruction with feedback to teachers, including prizes as a lottery for work that's completed by students. So this is, and I think one of the very important lessons here is, again, that human engagement, that the pilots that have worked the best are ones where there's a human on the other side, where the parent or the teacher is engaging with another individual. So parents who receive calls and SMS report that children spend about half an hour a week more on learning activities. So a final kind of takeaway here, holistic vision is important. Opportunities for more personalized learning to reach students, a focus on for all, and looking at designing strategies to reach everyone. Multi-channel remote learning is essential. Digital literacies, defining digital skills is very elastic, and these digital literacies are becoming more and more important, particularly for teachers. This idea of human engagement that I've talked quite a bit about, the whole of government approach that Ministry of Education need to engage with other parts of the government. Not reinventing the wheel, looking out and seeing what others are doing around the world and leveraging those experiences. On the data and systems side, increasingly open standards, architecture, and interoperability. We're finding that data is siloed, and there's very little integration of use of data in that fifth principle of being data-driven. And then finally, ministries of education as learning organizations and using data effectively. And finally, START. There's going to be no perfect solution. You are going to fail, and that's part of the learning process. Just the final thing, just to share with you, tomorrow, I'll put this in the chat, we're having an event on the future of learning. We'll be bringing in a game designer from the Institute of the Future that will talk about how to think about future forecasting, what education might look like in 2030, and looking back at a process that we started 10 years ago to begin to test different modalities of the future of education. So again, I'll take advantage of a plug here, Val, to invite anybody who's interested to this event. And again, I'll put it in the chat. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Bob. That was fantastic. And you made my life easier with your main takeaways in the end, your last slide. And if you allow me, I'd like to highlight one aspect of your representation is, for me, I think is what you mentioned in terms of let's put education as the lead in the education transformation process, not technology, not the other way around. I think this is key. Also, the equity dimension, the inclusion, the teachers, and also this engagement with the local ecosystem. And we'll see a little bit of that in the Colombia's experience later that we'll have here today. Also interesting, I think the main takeaways of your current study, this multi-channel strategies ensuring the feedback loop. And also it strikes me your I think interesting point about the human engagement, and this makes me feel and think a lot in terms of our AI, in education work. If you are telling me that the human element was key, so I think when we start our projects with AI education, we need to take a look on that and see how we can combine this, let's say, the human intelligence and the AI, the artificial intelligence as well. So thanks for that. And
absolutely.
we'll keep the conversation.
Just a shout out to Diana that the event tomorrow will share a little bit of the work we did with her in Colombia too. So
fantastic, thank you. So let's move now to the next speaker. So we are pleased to have here Stamatina Anaspoyoulou. So she's a research fellow in the University of Leicester and has been collaborating also with UNESCO and in other projects. And we know, Stamatina, that you have been working in hybrid learning, digital learning, also in terms of design thinking applied for the teachers, capacity development, etc. So we'd like to learn from you how you can see, how we can ensure this sort of ideal balance between remote learning, classroom learning experience, and what design thinking has to do with that. So please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Val. Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be part of this panel, and I'm very happy to be with you today. So today I'm going to talk about design thinking and how it provides a thinking approach to deal with the crisis and support teachers and schools in finding the right hybrid teaching and learning solutions for them. First of all, I would like to say a few words about hybrid learning, what it is. So hybrid learning combines, it's any combination that brings together a classroom teaching with learning with other distance learning modalities. It can vary widely according to the context of the learning and the needs of the students and other stakeholders. And also, there is no right or wrong hybrid learning solution. It's only the one that suits the particular context and specific needs. And now, one would think what hybrid learning might have to do with design thinking. The idea is that when dealing with the crisis, we need to find creative ways to match our needs. Now, design thinking provides a pathway, provides a mindset to produce these creative ways to deal with complex problems like the one we are facing with the COVID-19 crisis. Design thinking is a human-centered process. It ensures that solutions are grounded in the realities of the particular context and the particular needs of the people around it. And it requires a lot of prototyping, a lot of testing and refinement, and all this happens through iterations, through many iterations. Now, regarding the ideal balance between remote and in-classroom learning, in order to be able to address that, we need to think what has changed and what is missing now in the new situation with the schools closed. So students and teachers are not anymore with them. During the COVID-19 crisis, students and teachers are not together in a shared space anymore. Homes are not necessarily set up for teaching and learning, so they may lack internet connection, they may lack devices or resources. Students are not able to collaborate with their peers, and teachers cannot see exactly what the students are doing. Now, based on what is different now, I would like to focus on three main challenges. One is that students may be enrolled, but this doesn't mean that they are engaged, or they may not even be logged in. Teachers' satisfaction drops because they may have to teach in a vacuum, and they may become negative towards teaching at a distance. And also, their skills might not align to what is needed. In addition to what have been said before, we also need to consider that technology on its own is not enough. We need to understand the pedagogical framework to guide us on to how to use this technology for the particular context. And we need to address the full ecosystem of learning, which includes people, it includes educational processes, the resources available, and the technology. And we also need to use each element of the ecosystem to its maximum potential. And design thinking can facilitate us in finding this ideal balance for hybrid learning because it allows for multiple iterations. It allows us to come up with different solutions and try them, and then understand what works and why, and refine it in the future for the next round of iteration. Now, design thinking can support schools in this process by by providing evidence-based evidence for the practices and for the decision making. The process by which we can come up with the evidence-based practice is through collecting, analyzing, and acting upon the data we collect. And data here, when I refer to data here, it's not only data coming up through LMSs, through management systems, but I'm talking about data that can be produced either from the school on its own or by teachers themselves. It could be quantitative data like daily attendances, but it also could be qualitative data about their own experiences. So we need to collect data beyond annual summaries into daily records of what who is coming along, what tools are used, what types of activities are employed. We need to analyze it and understand what does such data that we have collected actually says, and what can we know from this data, and what else do we need to know. For example, can we tell the proportion of girls that are participating in the learning process? If not, what can we do in order to find out? And so in this way, we identify and enact possible actions, for example, and we can contact families to promote girls' participation. In this way, we can address challenge number one, which is ensuring that students are logged in and they are engaged, because through this collect, analyze, and act loop, we can actually ensure that students are coming along. In order to address challenge number two about teachers' attitudes and satisfaction, we can evidence-based practice again can support teachers in addressing that challenge by documenting their experiences and the lessons they have learned. For example, what is working and what is not working in their context. They can share this learning with other teachers, either within their school or in with the broader community, and use what has been learned to enhance future practices. Teachers could also receive continuous support and sustainable through acts like teach the trainer approaches, whereby some teachers receive training and they act as ambassadors for hybrid learning solutions. Such approach encourages the adoption of change by enhancing the status of teachers and developing a culture of openness and experimentation. And through the previous, what I said before about sharing and enacting on the learning achieved, we enable communities of practice, and communities of practice are really fundamental in dealing with this crisis and providing sustainable support to teachers. And we could enable communities of practice through regular meetings or online collaborations to share experiences without consequences. Now, design thinking helps us support teachers because we can identify that we can understand that best practices are not coming ready-made, but they are designed, and they are designed through a process of actively seeking and co-creating the experience. And this understanding contributes to rising teachers' awareness. It helps us anticipate and mitigate the risks and embraces failure. Like Bob said earlier, failure is part of the learning, so it shouldn't stop us. We should actually try to reflect on what didn't go well and go further. This process, this design thinking approach builds resilience to teachers, which is a fundamental skill to improve teachers' skill set and understand and take any action in order to improve further the skills needed. And this is addressing the third challenge, identifying. So in summary, I would like to close by repeating a few points. First of all, that giving access to appropriate technology is not the end of the story. It's only the first step. We need to understand how to use the technology for learning. It is essential, therefore, to use activities and pedagogies that enable student-centered learning. And design thinking allows us to identify what specific hybrid learning solution works for us. And effective teacher support can be achieved by developing communities of practice. Thank you very much. And I will be available for questions later on in the session.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stamatina. I think you highlight the main points, but I think I'd like to stress the one aspect, that is how design thinking can actually make students more engaged in these times that is very challenging. And this connects with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' call in terms of the risk that we have of more than 24 million of students that are potentially dropping out of the education systems. And he quoted some UNESCO data on that. So I think we as international community, we need to try to get together these kind of more participative pedagogies or methodologies to engage again with these students that can be left behind. So I think this is interesting. Also, another point of your presentation is this ecosystem vision, the community of practices, etc., engaging with the whole ecosystem. And I think this is a common thread we are seeing through the different presentations, and we will still continue seeing. So thank you very much, and looking forward to continue the discussion. Thank you. So we will continue now, and let's say we'll enter in the member states experience. So we are honored to have here two member states, Austria and Colombia. So I'd like to give the floor to our colleague coming from Austria, Stefan Waba, from the Department of IT Didactics and at the Austrian Federal Ministry of Education, Science and Research. And we know that Austria developed also some 8 priority plan for their digital teaching and learning. And we'd like to learn a little bit more about that. What were the main lessons of this, let's say, nationwide rollout from day to night and night to day? So I think it will be interesting to see how you managed to do that. What were the main lessons learned, and how was the engagement, for example, from teachers? No, and so that is Stefan. The floor is yours, and we are looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for inviting me, and all the best from Austria. Yes, I would like to talk about the 8-point plan for digital teaching and learning. I'd like to present an excerpt of this 8-point plan because I would like to present today the most important points, or the points where we feel we had the most learning from the COVID crisis. I think we are at the point in time now where we do exactly what also Robert mentioned in his presentation, that we try to invest now to ensure a future, to ensure a transition into the future, not only in terms of preparation for maybe another crisis, but also in terms of preparing for a new kind of learning, a new kind of teaching. And I like this kind of umbrella term of the hybrid learning and teaching, because it's not only about technology, about combining technology, but also about combining methodology, combining different methods, different styles of teaching and learning, which can be supported by different kinds of scenarios, like technology-based or like room presence learning based, but they also differ very much in terms of methods, in terms of how to engage learners, how to engage students, and how to help them to prepare for the future. So let me show you the first slide, which is the objectives of this 8-point plan. Of course, we're now at the point in time where we want to think of the future, so it's important for us to ensure a systematic and sustainable implementation of digital media, digital technology in the education system. We did have different projects, different approaches in the past, but this 8-point plan now tries to unify these approaches and tries to put on a nationwide strategy. So we'd like to roll out digitally supported teaching and learning nationwide, covering all schools, covering all school types, covering all types of teachers, not only specific ones. And we defined 8 priority fields. As you can see in our vision, the students is always in the center, surrounded by pedagogy first, thinking about the pedagogical aims and goals first, then turning to the teachers who would fulfill this, would also lead ways to getting to these goals by using methods, by using different materials, and also supported by technology. So these 3 aspects, they sort of go hand in hand, they sort of go together. One of the things we do is that we created a portal which is called Digital School. This is to also address an issue Robert mentioned, to sort of help teachers to concentrate on the teaching by lifting the load, by lifting the heavy load, which is presented to them by administration, by administrative tasks. So this portal Digital Schools would like to streamline the services, the streamline of applications that teachers use in their daily life by giving them a single point of entry, by logging in with an existing education account, and also then having a sort of a single sign-on to these mostly used administrative and pedagogical applications like LMS, student administration, class register, and so on. And also to sort of ensure the communication between school students and parents or guardians. So these 3 types of people, teachers, students, and parents, guardians, they are all stakeholders, and they will all have accounts in this portal to sort of get together in this virtual space. We are continually developing features and rolling out features. What we have at the moment is a kind of dashboard thing. So if you log on to this portal, you see everything which is important for your personal role in the school and also for your personal job in the school at a glance. For instance, you can see your classes, your colleagues at a glance, and it just takes a few mouse clicks to communicate, to work with them together. Then we have implemented a kind of learning material search. I would like to point out here that we have tried to catalog learning materials according to competence frameworks. So it's now not just typing in a subject or typing in a kind of field of knowledge, but you would really have the opportunity to sort of click through frameworks, to click through curricula, which are important for your own subject, and then get to materials. So we linked this kind of material pool with the underlying competence models. A second very important project within the framework or within this 8-point plan is the standardization of platforms. So one of the one of the biggest learning we had from the COVID crisis was that the use of too many platforms and communication channels was perceived by parents, by students as disadvantages. So during time of lockdown, students, parents didn't know exactly which communication channel to use, where teachers posted what, where which homework has to be uploaded. And so we asked schools to sort of look at the things they use in their school and to concentrate on just one communication channel per use case or per scenario. We don't say just, eliminate all the platforms, just use one platform, but think of the use cases, think of the scenarios you usually have in your school, the typical scenarios, and then decide on one approach per school so that all teachers and all students, parents know where to look. We have support structures to do that, like our homepage service portal EDTECH. On this service portal, for instance, we offer help for schools to sort of take the decision. For instance, we compare common learning management systems, we compare their features, so schools can really take a decision based on knowledge. One of the most important things is the teacher training approach. As we heard also in the presentation so far, we chose to take the opportunity and to try out the MOOC approach, a massive open online course approach, because in Austria, we did have various e-learning approaches in teacher education, but we have never tried MOOCs. So we thought, why not try a MOOC? And we this summer, we set up this distance learning MOOC, as it's called. I think you're familiar with the features of a MOOC. What a MOOC is, it's mostly self-guided, self-paced learning. We wanted to make sure that in autumn, when there are more waves of COVID to be dealt with, we wanted to all teachers to be prepared for using this technology to support teaching in blended and distance learning settings. And so we constructed a 4-week MOOC, which deals with the basics of distance learning, the use of platforms, the use of content, and how to communicate with students and educators. And we have got our special organization, Virtuelle PH, which is called like a virtual teacher training college, and they're specialized in designing these virtual teacher trainings. This is like how it looks like. It doesn't look like very fancy or so. It's very functional. So we have got learning videos, resources, and very important reflection questions to ensure the practice transfer. And we had quite a success in the completion rate. So more than 18,000 participants took part, which is roughly a fifth of the Austrian teaching population. And we have this high completion rate of 50%. So if you know about MOOCs, you know MOOCs suffer from a very high dropout rate. People don't finish the MOOCs. One of the reasons why people don't finish the MOOCs is because they sort of can't integrate the learning in the MOOC in their daily lives. They can't integrate it within their self-paced learning. And we offered within this MOOC, we offered a kind of support structure in the form of moderation of discussion forums and so-called consultation hours, so webinars by experienced tutors, to make sure that the teachers really stay engaged and really finish and really do these discussions, tasks, and also ask themselves these reflective questions. And my last project, my last one I would like to mention, is a very big thing also for us, is to roll out devices for students. So we know that in many countries, similar approaches have been taken. This is the chance for us now to do this. So in some cases, Corona also proved to be a kind of booster for investing in education. In this case, we can now finally also have a similar approach to rolling out devices. For us, this is a very, very big school development project. So as it's been said before many times, as I think we all agree, is that we have to really invest lots of brain power, lots of energy into development processes, not only concerning teaching, not only concerning developing methods, training and stuff, but also what it means for a school to have now this element of digital devices in the school, because they do a lot to a school community. They're not only there like present in the lessons, they're also there in the breaks. There are questions of financing, about insurance, and so on and so forth. So for us, this is a very big step in school development. And so in the center of this rollout is that schools have to prove that they really have prepared for the devices. They're expected to be delivered by next school year, so in autumn 2021. And schools have to use this year from now to the autumn 2021 to take a step-by-step approach to really prepare. So this is a kind of screenshot that we provide to schools, which steps they have to take. Very roughly, it's about really checking with all stakeholders, parents, students, teachers, they really want to participate, then apply for this initiative, then having a kind of steering committee that would steer the school development program. In the autumn, in the spring, we will have another MOOC, which is a school development MOOC that tries to sort of take people, take them by the hand and follow them or lead them to kind of school development process. And then at the end, a lot of teacher training, of course, is there involved. And at the end, over the summer, these devices are delivered, and then the real job starts next school year to really make sure that the development proves fruititious, and that also these innovative methods can be used in school. So I'm happy to answer any questions later on. I hope I could maybe give you a quick glance in our 8-point plan. Please feel free to check the links to find out all the details, or just drop me an email.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you very much for this presentation and to make us to travel to Austria. And through your education system and through your 8-point plan, I found interesting the approach in terms of having one entry point national platform. I think this is an interesting one because we saw mainly some equity dimensions, some challenging context that parents and families, they were struggling to combine so many platforms, and that they need from one day to the other is start using. So I think this is an interesting point in terms of equity as well. Also, the teachers' capacity that you reinforce, the rollout of digital devices as well. Yeah, I think the overall, the systemic strategy was a highlight of your presentation. So thank you very much for that, and we are looking forward to continue the discussion and also to learn more how the next phase of your plan goes as well. So thank you. And we'll move now from Austria to Colombia. So we have the pleasure as well to have here with us Ms. Diana Silva Lizarrazo. She's Director of Educational Innovation in the Ministry of National Education of Colombia. And she has been leading the work on ICT education, AI for some time in her country already. We can see, I think, as I mentioned before, a sort of common thread of the importance of an ecosystem approach when we come to design strategies in a hybrid learning. And I would like to invite Diana to share with us what were the main points of their strategy in Colombia, how they integrate this approach, mainly combine online and offline. So we know that Colombia has been partnering with their national television and to bring learning for those regions and community in which the access to internet was not a reality. So would like to move to Ms. Diana and learn more about Colombia's experience. Please, Diana, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to UNESCO. And on behalf of the Ministry of Education of Colombia, we are really very happy to be here today, to be able to speak with and hear experts and excellent panelists that are with us. And we would like to speak to you a little bit about what we have done in our country, in Colombia, faced with the situation of the pandemic, but also going back 2 years ago when we started focusing on issues of in educational innovation. Now, I'd like to kick off with something that we see as very valuable. And we have to recognize that in our country, we have been working for over 10 years on strategies linked to different ways of using technology, from teacher training in this direction as well. And therefore, we have been able to come up with a lot of content, a lot of quality content. And we are still working on integrating ICTs into the classroom. Now, 2 years ago, we started thinking about how we could work, and we set up a model that is known as a national ecosystem for educational innovation. Now, similar to what we heard from Robert, it's the importance of generating ecosystems so that we can have what we need for digital transformation. And so before the pandemic and everything that's happening today, we had already set up an ecosystem. What does that mean? For us, that means being able to work with all areas of government, being able to work with industry as well, so that we were able to reach our goals from a technological point of view. And we had a lot of work to do in that area, but also working with the different at the different levels of education, the different regional boards of education, which is focusing on all of these different themes, and working all together towards these common projects. There's something that's very important for us, and that is the fact that for the first time in this government, we created the High Council for Digital Transformation. And creating this entity helped us to really channel our work. It sounds easy to say that we all work together. However, it's not that easy in reality, because every entity, every ministry, and every stakeholder within this landscape has their own specific objectives and interests. And we were trying to make sure that there would be projects that would help us to work on common themes towards a common goal. And as Robert was saying, speaking about these ecosystems, we started taking the best things that existed, the best factors, aspects that existed, and trying to build on that so that we could work on, for example, developing 21st century skills, working in computational, critical and creative thinking, talent for the fourth industrial revolution. And also something that's extremely important for us was the focus on STEM. For the first time in our country, the Ministry for Education is focusing clearly about STEM and is promoting it very clearly. And this is something that, of course, will require us to work with teachers and other educational stakeholders. How can we really change pedagogical practices? And I mention that here because this is really at the heart of a lot of what we are going through today and what we're what we're experiencing today, the need for hybrid solutions using TV, using radio, the things that I'm going to speak about. All of this needs us to work hand in hand with teachers so that they can change their teaching practices. And so we created a database and what you can see here in the line below hand, all of these documents, these policy documents, the Compass for Digital Transformation, for Technologies to Learn. We've also focused on digital security policies and, of course, a theme linked to rural connectivity, which is fundamental. In our country, we see that there is a large population that lives in rural areas, and the majority of the schools are actually situated in these areas. So, the pandemic knocking at our door, we were obliged to tap into these resources and really use the best resources that existed in this area. And this allowed us to be able to have access to different resources, either with internet access or without internet access. Now, our country has made major efforts to try and increase tech connectivity for all Colombians. However, we can say that there are 50% of people in our country who can actually access internet at home, but the other 50% cannot. And the government is trying to, of course, reach those that other 50%. And as I said, we have many people living in rural areas, and that presents many challenges to us. And we are working to try and make sure that people living in these rural areas will be able to go to centers that will be able to give them access to the internet and to these resources through the EDTECH initiative, in particular rolled out by our government. So, as I said, we have educational resources which require internet access and which don't require internet access. We, of course, had to work with educational stakeholders. We also had to regenerate certain types of material to make to increase our flexibility when using these different types of technology. But of course, we also looked at these first generation forms of technology, let's say radio, television, and the phone, of course, in areas where people don't have access to internet. And so we created a strategy which was called Aprender Digital, Learn Digital. And this strategy allowed us to deliver over 80,000 educational resources of the best of the resources that we had in our database. And this is only possible if we have an ecosystem like the ecosystem that we set up. And we also add to that 10,000 allied elements of content that were reviewed, evaluated, and then rolled out very quickly. So in this platform, we have fairly wide-ranging access to all of this content, and this has allowed us to reach all corners of the country. This content can also be uploaded to tablets and to computers, and of course, given the context of the pandemic, it was actually difficult to get these computers into schools because children weren't in schools. So we had to try and get these computers to the children directly at home. We also created some applications, for example, for learning English, and this was received very well by students, by pupils. We also created digital libraries, and something else that I heard in this panel and from other colleagues, we also focused in Colombia on evaluation, and we set up an initiative which is called Evaluate to Progress, which is all about identifying the shortcomings and gaps that can exist that some pupils have, to try and help students to overcome these their learning difficulties. We also set up a television program which was meant to be entertaining as well for pupils, and we took a lot of care in making sure that this television program was set up in alliance with the National Ministry for National Education. We had to think about the scientific and the creative aspects, the communicative aspects that we are trying to promote as part of our ecosystem. This program is broadcasted on regional channels and can reach all corners of our country. There are also programs that we have to, in order to facilitate access to internet. For example, there is also there are certain platforms that don't actually require internet access in order to be able to access them, and also at higher education level. We can see that there's been an implementation of ICT in this area too. And we are trying in a certain way, what I'm trying to tell you very quickly, is to make sure that all of this could be recognized and acknowledged. And so here you have a bibliography of all the different platforms or different media outlets about what we're doing. So this is what we have experienced, and during the pandemic, we were rolling out a program that wasn't born this year, but as I said beforehand, takes the best that exists and builds on it. And we consider that what we have been doing and what was accelerated due to the pandemic is something that has also been taken up by the Inter-American Development Bank. We have been trying to make sure that we have the platforms and the content. We've been trying to make sure that there's even more equipment and more connectivity. And we're trying to see what we need to do to make sure that we can change teaching methods. That's very important for us. When we began 2 years ago, we could see that in our country, 58.4% of teachers were over 45 years old. And this meant that we had to make sure that we did a lot of work working with these teachers, teaching them how to do things differently. And indeed, all of this is part of the manual for success that we have tried to implement in Colombia. And so with this vision of the ecosystem, we've also tried to take advantage of the innovation laboratory that's been extremely important during the pandemic. And we believe that we need to go even further with the ecosystem that we have built, because hybrid learning needs to make sure that teachers have specific skills. Pupils also have to learn how to learn in this way. And this is not something that is easy to achieve. And that means that we have to give a lot of support to people. When it comes to innovation, we have to see it as something that transforms the context in which people are working and the practices that people have. And also, we have to focus, for example, on the 21st century skills that we want pupils to actually learn. Finally, let's say that Colombia does not have just one national curricula. We work with the different educational institutes, and in each area of the country, each school actually has its own curriculum. And that means that we had to focus on the projects that we see as necessary for those schools. So this, in a broad sense, was what I wanted to share with you today, and now I'm ready for any questions you'd like to.
Thank you very much, Leandro. You've given us a really good overview of what's happening in Colombia. Obviously, we don't have time to highlight all the points, but I'd like to come back to this question of laboratory for innovation, bringing everyone together. and how you have got to this stage where you have then this whole idea of pedagogical transformation and skills needed for the 21st century. And I was wondering how you've been able to build on your experience of the last couple of years, drawing on previous experiments. I think all that was very interesting. I think it's a big challenges you've decided to take on, and in UNESCO, of course, our door was open to you. What you've said about STEM is very interesting, and I think that could tie into a number of projects that we're running here, our Education Coalition. So thank you very much, and I'll now hand over to Mark.
I hope you have a little bit of time to bring the discussion and bring some questions to the fore. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Val, and thanks to all of our participants watching today for the many and excellent questions. We don't have a lot of time, so we're going to pull from the questions that have been posed, one question for each of the speakers. We know that the UNESCO speaker, Fengxun Miao, is not with us anymore, but some interesting questions were directed to him. But we'll move straight over to Robert Hawkins from the World Bank. Hi, Robert. Question for you about, you mentioned this idea that technology should help teachers teach and practice pedagogy and not do so much of the bureaucratic sort of tasks and administrative tasks. But people were saying that despite all the promise that technology will facilitate sort of a greater focus on teaching and learning and pedagogy, the technology has a sort of way of introducing yet more administrative tasks, more bureaucratic sort of hoops to jump through. And we were wondering, in your study of countries in this sort of shift to technology facilitated learning, did you notice more or less sort of admin and bureaucracy? And how can technology finally realize this promise of allowing a greater focus on learning and less focus on bureaucracy and administration? Over to you, Robert.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it was definitely one of the key findings of the effectiveness study, that teachers were burnt out. And a lot of the burnout was from the administrative tasks of following up individually in many cases with students, collecting data on whether they're connected or not, collecting data on whether they finished their assignments, collecting data on how often they've been attending any of the virtual classes, collecting data on whether they've been tuning into any of the radio instructions. So a lot of the administrative burden was put onto the teachers, and definitely one of the findings was that they were completely burned out. They weren't, and part of that was that they weren't prepared for this mode of teaching. The curriculum wasn't aligned, the support systems weren't aligned. So they were kind of thrown into this, and they did what they could, but a definite outcome was burnout. I mean, going forward, I think there are opportunities, as was discussed in the case of Austria, of aligning technology more effectively to be able to capture some of the data on particularly student learning, student attendance online, freeing up some of that time that is usually done in terms of grading papers, assessment, making sure who's in the class, to allow teachers to engage more with the students. I think there's also a change in role of the teachers. I think teachers will have to actually take on more work to a certain extent of networking with other teachers, of engaging with parents. So I think the role of teachers will be changing, but I think that ministers of education can focus on using technology and thinking about technology to really take off this administrative burden of collecting data in a manual way. So.
Thank you very much, Robert. Appreciate that response. And if we have time, we'll come back with some of the other questions that were raised in response to your presentation. Satamina, thank you for your presentation about sort of hybrid learning. We had a question about sort of teacher resistance to hybrid and blended learning. There was an example cited from Italy, saying that teachers simply wanted to treat this as a last resort. You know, this is something we do in an emergency context, but otherwise we prefer to have our students in classrooms in this sort of traditional way. And I think also, to be fair to some of these teachers, this is not all just sort of fear of technology or doing something different, but some of this may be grounded on, you know, a sincere belief that this is a wrong direction for education, and that they prefer to sort of be working with students face to face. And so just wondering, through some of the work and research you have done, how strong is this resistance? And you know, how do we sort of navigate this at country levels, at sort of an even, you know, looking across countries? How have you seen this in your research? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Well, a way around dealing with resistance is through communities of practice and train-the-trainer approach, whereby the trained teachers act as ambassadors, and they could be more effective when there are incentives provided by the state, and these incentives are not necessarily monetary incentives, could be around recognition awards. And I think if we want teachers to shift their attitudes, it should come from within, from their own colleagues, people that they trust and people they can share their problems. And I think design thinking offers such opportunities because it allows teachers to share experiences and say the difficulties they have. And at the end of the day, we need to be aware that technology is not there to replace face-to-face teaching. Technology is there to facilitate learning. We need to identify what technology can offer for learning and beyond COVID-19. And things that technology can offer, they could provide new experiences. They could provide opportunities to students to experiment with things that cannot do in real life. For example, they could experiment with no gravity situations, or through apps or software or technology or AR, VR technologies available. They could try things that are not able to do in everyday life. But also, technology can connect the school experience to the home experiences, and the way that COVID-19 allowed us to move learning to the home and connect with the parents and connect with the student's situation at home. I think this is a valuable learning, and we can take it forward. So we should not forget about it. And technology can also connect school with everyday experiences and with what we learn outside the school. And I think this is also valuable. And I have done extensive research on that and how we can connect museum learning in museums with subject matters at schools, or how we could relate homework to everyday life and make it relevant to their personal lives, students' personal lives.
Right.
So I think we should not think technology, we should not think distance learning as an either-or situation, whereby we will either be distant in the distance or we will be face-to-face. But we can see what technology can offer to enhance our learning experiences at schools and beyond.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think that's what this webinar is all about, is this hybrid approach. It is, as you said, not sort of an either or, but a bit of a both and proposition, sort of taking the best of both opportunities. We have time just for a few more questions. Understand we're going just a bit over time, but did want to allow time for a little bit of Q&A. So question for Austria. Thank you very much for this information about the 8-point plan, all the interesting work happening in Austria that you mentioned, Stefan. Question about the communication platforms. Your work was showing a lot of...
Sorry, I think Austria is disconnected already.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay. Unfortunate. Okay. So then last question then for Colombia. So thank you for the presentation, Diane, about the work and experience in Colombia. Wanted to speak specifically to, you were talking about how teacher skills need to be upgraded. You know, the digital pedagogy is different than sort of face-to-face pedagogy. And just your experiences in Colombia about what you also mentioned, how many teachers are, you know, over 45 years old, maybe don't have a lot of experience using digital technologies in their own life or for teaching and learning. And just wanted to understand that what have you been seeing as sort of the most effective ways to bring teachers who are already in the classroom to sort of help them develop their digital pedagogy skills? What have been the most effective practices in Colombia? Over to you, Diane. Thank you.
Okay, well, as I was saying, Colombia has been working in this area for several years. I did teacher training, that's to say, giving them digital skills in general. So the challenge is how to go from this type of training and digital skill in general to the ability to include such technologies in our pedagogical approach. And it was really about seeing how we could develop what would be necessary so as to have a teaching staff that was fully motivated and interested in the transformation of pedagogical practices. So we drew on those existing training schemes, and we think that the situation meant that we had to use other technologies that people weren't thinking of. There were teachers and students and parents who became important stakeholders in this process in identifying other technologies. So what were we trying to do? As I say, we've had this project up and running for the last 2 years, and we decided in that framework that what we needed in order to take advantage of this basic digital training that we had, we needed to take it up to another level. For example, in STEM, we have been working with teachers across the country so as to see if we could identify ways of making curriculum more flexible. And we've also worked on using these teacher training courses in computers to see how we could get students involved, not just the teachers, to see how we could have a more holistic approach so that students could become key stakeholders in this teacher training approach, and how building on that, we could come to an understanding of how either technology-driven or not technology-driven, we could innovate and focus on what was interesting, creative, scientific, and computational thinking. So what we did was try to draw on this broad-based digital training that we had in place, and through that identify new, say, STEM focuses and a more flexible approach, so cross-discipline, so that people could see what possibilities there were and integrate that in education innovation when it's properly contextualized, so that they could manage change with their students and in the framework of their existing teaching practices.
Gracias, Diana. Thank you for the response to that question, and thank you for sharing the experiences of your country. I'm sorry, we're going to have to wrap up now, just a bit over time. So Sophie, back over to you.
Thanks a lot, Mark. As we close, thank you to all the panelists for the excellent presentations. Thank you for the participants for the questions and the comments. The presentations will be made available. Several of you were asking on the chat. One word in closing: connections. One, human connections. We started with that. Learning is rooted in social interaction and processes, and it is about connecting the learners to learners, teachers and learners, families in the case of with the school, and with educators in the case of the COVID disruption. So a human-centered approach to technology. The technology is the tool, but it is really ultimately learning is about the human communication and the human connections. Two is connecting technologies. That EdTech is often equated with digital technology, but it should encompass the range of technologies that we have, and a flexible approach that combines these technologies according to circumstances and particular situations. TV, radio, mobile, landline telephone, in addition to internet. Even in the case of digital technologies, we know that when we have quite well-established learning platforms, there is not full inclusion, and that digital inclusion remains a challenge, in particular for learners with disabilities. And third, connecting learning spaces. That regardless, schools, even if we transform pedagogy, teaching and learning practices, content, curriculum, the physical space and the social space of the school remains important, but it increasingly needs to connect with the home. We've seen it with COVID-19, needs to connect with other spaces of learning. We heard about social and cultural spaces, and connect the education sector with other sectors. We heard about a more whole government approach, connecting better with industry. And finally, connecting learners with engaging and meaningful learning. It's the whole question of understanding engagement and disengagement of learners during this process. We know that COVID-19 disruption will affect dropouts, but there is an issue of the effectiveness of the learning, not only in what is learned in academic terms, but how engaged and all the importance of data and evaluation to understand patterns of engagement of learning of learners with these hybrid, remote, blended forms of learning. And I'll stop here. Once again, thank you to all the speakers and to the panelists and to all the participants. We do have our last joint webinar coming up in January. Please keep an eye out on our page on the COVID education disruption and response for an announcement of that webinar. And wishing you all a safe and pleasant end of year and start of new year. Thank you very much, and hope to see you all soon.